Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. It's Thursday, July 10th. It happens to be the 25th anniversary of the Hugh Hewitt Show, the 43rd anniversary of my marriage to the fetching Mrs. Hewitt. So it's a big day, and I'm very glad to have a couple of big guests to start with. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson wrote perhaps the blockbuster of the spring in Original Sin. I read it probably 6 weeks ago, maybe 8 weeks ago, but I went on vacation. They went on vacation. This has been like my trying to get a date as a sophomore in high school. I really could not get out. People were washing their hair in their car and they were going shopping, but we finally got them together. Thank you both. Congratulations on Original Sin. My first question to both of you, I watched a lot of the interviews that you both did. And it didn't seem to me like many people had actually read Original Sin because they didn't follow up on any of the news. Alex, let me start with you. Was that your impression that a lot of your interviewers had not actually read the book?
I wouldn't say a lot, but there were definitely a few interviews, and I'm not going to name names, but there were
Of
definitely a
course not.
few interviews where I was like, "You haven't really read the book."
Now, and Jake, did you notice that there were just some obvious questions that did not get asked?
Yeah, but people have their own agendas. I will say, and this is going to sound like I'm polishing the teacher's apple, but you always read the book. And even when I wrote a 500-page book about an outpost in Afghanistan, not only did you read the book, the bump ins and bump outs were music cited in the book. When you had me on, whatever it was, 13 years ago to talk about the outpost.
That's because
Yeah.
The Outpost was a great book. Let me get to the news of this book. If the only thing that people hear about Original Sin is this interview, I want to make sure they get the big grabs. I'm trying to impose chronology on a well-written narrative. And because you went with narrative and storytelling, the chronology gets a little out of kilter, but I went back and recreated it. And I want to start in the Manhattan home of Carrie Fowler and Amy Goldman Fowler on September 20th, 2023. Jake, what was unusual about that? Michael Shearer, the New York Times frequent guest on this program, was there. What happened?
It was an event. This is in the chronology of the real deterioration of Joe Biden, which had been happening for years. But in our reporting, we ascertained that it really started getting bad, super bad, in the summer of 2023. President Biden told his basic origin story in his presidential campaign of 2020. Whether it's apocryphal or not depends on your perspective, I suppose. But his origin story has to do with he was never going to run for president again, and then the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally and President Trump's reaction to it happened, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is he told this story twice. He told the exact same story twice within 3 minutes of itself about the march, about the death of Heather Heyer, about President Trump's reaction, and then literally 3 minutes later he tells the same story. And this was shocking to people in the room. It happened on a Friday, and I forget if it was a holiday weekend or not, but when reporters asked about it a few days later, Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, basically said he cares about the story so much that's why he told it twice, which was a very not believable explanation.
All right, that's September 20th. Jake, quick follow-up. How many people are in the Fowlers' apartment? Do you have a guesstimate on that? Is it 20? Is it 50? Is it 100?
Probably closer to 50. These fundraisers tended to be. I'd have to go back and look, but these fundraisers, these small but high dollar fundraisers, tended to be within 3 to 5 dozen people.
All right, now, Alex, I want to go up to something I didn't know about the weekend. I have not now, nor have I ever been invited to the weekend. First I ever learned about it was in Original Sin. Sounds pretty interesting. Were you there, Alex, at the weekend when this happened?
No, I wasn't.
Jake, were you at the weekend when this happened?
No. The only people I know of that were there were Ron Klain, Karl Rove, Jonathan Karl from ABC News, and Ari Emanuel, and then a couple other people I talked to for the book. But this is not something
I'd written John Karl Rove, Chris Christie. So this is an eclectic group of political addicts. And Ari Emanuel. Alex, tell people who Ari Emanuel is if they don't know, if they don't play inside baseball.
Yeah, so Ari Emanuel is the brother of Rahm Emanuel, who was former congressman, chief of staff to Barack Obama, mayor of Chicago, Biden's ambassador to Japan. Also the brother of Ezekiel Emanuel, a doctor who had been on Biden's COVID team. And Ari Emanuel but Ari Emanuel in his own right is one of the most powerful, uh, you know, basically agents in Hollywood. And he is at this meeting and he basically starts screaming at Biden's former chief of staff, Ron Klain, and says, I'm paraphrasing here, but people want the actual quote. You can read the book, but basically
We can't say it on the air.
Yeah, I promise. I'm
me.
keeping it clean. I'm keeping it clean. But he basically says, aging happens. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. What are you doing? Like Biden is old. This is irresponsible. And honestly, is the cleanest and nicest version of Ari Emanuel ever put to audio in my paraphrasing of him. But essentially, that's what he says.
Let me quote what you guys write. Ari Emanuel, from the back of the room, Emanuel began yelling at Ron Klain, Biden cannot run, he needs to drop out. Everyone around the president, worst of all, Joe was lying. Emanuel would say Jill and Hunter and Jeffrey Katzenberg and Ron blanking Klain were lying. So he's screaming. How many people are there? That's what I want to get to at the weekend. Is it 100? Is it 200? Is it 500 people? Jake?
I think it's about 100, but I'd have to go back. This is Ari Emanuel throws this as Alex notes. He's one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, the CEO of WME Endeavor. He was, I mean, this is how elite he was. He was at Jeff Bezos's wedding. That's how fancy Ari Emanuel is. Rahm Emanuel not there. Zeke Emanuel not there. Ari Emanuel was there. Yeah, he's stunned, and he doesn't give a penny he's a big Democratic donor, a big supporter of, although he did used to be Donald Trump's agent, we should know, during the Celebrity Apprentice era. But he does not want Donald Trump to be president, but he does not give the Biden campaign a penny because he is just thoroughly disgusted and demoralized by what he thinks the Democrats are doing.
But he's also sophisticated. He also knows what he's doing. And again, I note John Carl, excellent reporter for ABC. We've got Carl Robe, friend of mine, Chris Christie, friend of mine most days, some days not so much when he's throwing hammers at me, but that's fine. And then they're all there along with 100 other people, and they see Ari Emanuel doing this. Let's go to December 11th, 2023. Another anecdote from Original Sin. Pittsburgh Penguins CEO David Morehouse flies, he's a hero in Pittsburgh, which says something because Pittsburgh people have a detector for people who aren't authentic. He flies to Philly for an afternoon fundraiser, and he says that Joe Biden, quote, reminded him of his ailing mother. He immediately said to a governor with whom he was close, we're not going to say the name, Josh Shapiro, I know you can't respond, but just listen to what I'm saying. I've worked on 4 of these things. This guy cannot run for president of the United States. Governor Shapiro was at that fundraiser, as well as former Governors Wolf and Rendell, Senators Chris Coons, Congresswoman Madeline Dean. Again, it's kind of a detail, it gets left out. How big is this fundraiser, Alex? Do we remember the number?
Actually, I'm going to defer to Jake on this one because he did most of the reporting on this particular anecdote.
Any reporting in Philly is my wheelhouse. So I think again, it's like a 50 to 100 thing, 100-person thing, and I like the case you're prosecuting here. I appreciate it.
You know where I'm going.
Oh yeah, 100%. But yeah, I mean, this is from a behind the scenes exchange that David Morehouse has with President Biden. Morehouse had worked for Bill Clinton in 92, for Bill Clinton in 96. He had worked his way up. He was a mid to high level advisor to Al Gore in 2000, and was a fairly high level advisor to John Kerry in 2004. He'd actually be a good guest for you someday. Hugh, just because he has a feel for the kind of voters that Democrats really just started to lose during his 4 campaigns, from Bill Clinton in '92 to John Kerry in 2004. And one of the issues he had with the Biden campaign before the aging thing was just how out of touch they were and how they were failing to reach the kind of guys that David Morehouse grew up with. Pittsburgh white men.
It's the Ohio-Pennsylvania border
Yeah.
from the lake down to the Steelers' land, and they all went, like Mahoning County and Trumbull County, flipped from being deep blue to being deep red, and it's because of Donald Trump. And I would like to talk to Morehouse. I want to go back to the method of my madness and throw 4 of them at you in a row. In early 2024, there are private meetings with President Biden, Democratic senators who notice something more than aging. On January 17th, President Biden meets with House and Senate Democrats and some Republicans and his national security team. One of them says, well, at least the guy's not comatose. On January 22nd, on the 55th anniversary of Roe, President Biden slurs his words, mix up Mayorkas and Becerra. A person, I think it's Becerra, says, this is crazy what's going on. I don't understand. And then it goes to, I'll come back to February. So by January of 2024.
It isn't Becerra that says that. It's a senior administration official. Yeah.
So, but where we are is what I've laid out here are 6 different events, and hundreds of people know that the president has fallen into infirmity. Is that fair, Jake? Hundreds of people know.
I would say it's fair to say that as of what's going on in the fall of 2023 and early 2024, hundreds of people see moments of serious addlement that cause various degrees of concern. And I would, and by the way, of all the folks and all the anecdotes you've just shared, Morehouse calls people. He calls around and he talks to Anthony Bernal, and like he actually is behind the scenes trying to say, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. This isn't going to work. And also, Morehouse is in the book expressing disappointment that, as a former top aide to the primary, in his case, Kerry and Gore, disappointment that Biden didn't have aides like him, that he would think he would have said, close the door, have the meeting with, like, you can't do this. This is not working. But your larger point that there are hundreds of people who saw what we all saw debate night behind the scenes and didn't say anything at all to anyone that we know of in terms of like trying to like reach out to people at the White House or the campaign and say, this isn't going to work. I take your point, and I don't disagree.
It's a bipartisan sort of omerta, because we're talking Carl and Chris Christie, so it's not like just Democrats are sitting on the story. Lots of people are sitting on the story. It begins to fall apart. Now, since I've got it on tape from 2022, early 2022, I always use the term, he's infirm and getting more so, because that's not a medical term. It's an observational term that lawyers can use, and people can make that judgment without being a professional. Infirmity does not mean necessarily cognitive impairment, but when the people in these rooms see him in the way, I didn't get to interview President Biden, and I think the reason is he wasn't up to a serious interview, as debate night showed. But on February 7th, he goes to the G7, and that's when he remembered meeting with Helmut Kohl. He went at the G7. He was telling the Helmut Kohl story at G7. And on February 8th, the Her report drops. Alex, would you describe the effect of the Her report on Team Biden? Because it's like a bomb going off.
And it's an existential political threat, because the Biden team long knew that his age was the biggest political concern. The thing that makes the Her report so interesting is that, a pretty senior member of the White House told me it was Robert Her finally said the thing, and you couldn't unsay it. And so, the Biden team basically enlists every single member of the Democratic Party to try to slime Robert Her and try to ruin him and his career. and say that he is a right-wing hack that unnecessarily talked about Biden's age in a special counsel report, which, by the way, if you read the report, especially given that the DOJ was prosecuting Trump for his mishandling of classified documents, uh, Biden looks incredibly guilty. He is on tape in 2017 saying there is the classified stuff in my basement, and Robert Hur did not indict him, basically saying he is not capable. Like, we don't think we could get a conviction because the jury would just think he's too old to be convicted. But I
Huge
think it,
integrity points for Robert Hur, and I also
yeah,
think the night of the debate, when one of his team texts vindication or something like that of the debate, they are feeling vindicated because they got slimed. And again, there were hundreds of people who knew they were being slimed, and nobody said anything. I'm just astonished that nobody who knows steps up and says, "No, Mr. Hur." To your knowledge, did anyone who went to any of these events ever step up and defend Robert Hur?
no,
No.
because all the incentives were geared towards not saying anything. Donors didn't want to say anything because they didn't want to be attacked by the Biden folks. Democratic leaders who saw moments basically felt that by speaking out, they were going to end up like former Congressman Dean Phillips and basically be driven out of Congress. The threat that a lot of Democrats believe, I think sincerely, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. And if you believe that, you can rationalize anything, including putting a person that you know is not up to 4 more years in the Oval Office.
All right, now, Jake, I want to go to the D-Day commemoration in June because you write a very riveting account of what was shocking before a global audience. And the president doesn't recognize Seth Moulton, among many other things. One guy grimaced at his responses. There was an interview around with David Muir that went so bad, the ABC crew were all shocked. I'm just adding to the circle. We're up to thousands of people now know the president, right? It's just not ready to be president.
There are certainly hundreds of people that are seeing him not up to the task of being president. 100, yeah, I absolutely. I think I know that you started your what's the term you used?
Infirmity. Yeah, infirm.
Infirmity in 2022. I would say our reporting suggests that some of the infirmity was visible at times as far back as 2015 after the death of his son Beau. People thought it was grief, but in retrospect they thought it possibly was much more than that. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. But I do think 2023 is when it got past the point of no return. That's not just infirm because he's old. It's infirm because there is some sort of decline happening, some sort of cognitive decline. And yes, I think by D-Day, D-Day anniversary in 2024, it is hundreds of people are seeing this. Now, some people don't know whether it's just physical, right? You see President Biden walking the way he walks in 2024, and some of the Democratic members of Congress that were there at the D-Day anniversary observed that there were D-Day veterans, 99 and 100 years old, who were more spry than Joe Biden at that event. So, some of it is it just physical? Is it just he has this degenerative spine situation? Or is it also mental? And I think that there is a degree to which it comes and goes, good days and bad days, good moments and bad moments. But yes, hundreds of people have now seen this.
You see, I noticed one theme throughout Original Sin. My father-in-law, Marine Corps Colonel, late great man, fought on Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima. He died of a combination of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. I was the lawyer in the family, so I got to walk him through that. There are lots of references to that in Original Sin, to people who've seen aging parents and in-laws go down this slope either at a fast pace or a slow pace. But everybody knows that it's happening. What I'm astonished by is that we did not find out until the debate. So I want to go to debate day and ask a technical question first. I know because I've done them with you, Jake, and Dana, and with Wolf. you guys have the White Room. You do rehearsals again and again and again. Did Mark Preston play Trump again?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
You think
Who
Mark,
played President?
uh, uh,
No one's better than Mark at Trump. But who played the
he's so
president?
good. You think that Mark would pass up an opportunity to beat the crap out of me behind closed doors, to berate me,
Yeah.
which President Trump did not do, by the way. Terrence, I don't know if I don't know if he was at CNN when you were there. Played Joe
No.
Biden, and the main way
No.
he played Joe Biden was by giving short answers. We just from watching debates, we knew that Biden doesn't always take all his time. He might have 90 seconds and he might take 40 of it. But we did not prepare, if you're wondering. We did not.
That's what I was
that.
getting to.
No,
Did
no.
Terrence do any kind of breakdown, any kind of vacant stare, any mumbling about saving Medicare or whatever it was he said? Nothing like that.
Yeah. Not saving
And
Medicare.
I point out
We finally beat
for the
we finally
audience.
beat Medicaid. Beat
Yeah,
Medicare.
we beat
Yeah.
I was
No.
watching the debate with a couple of Hollywood people, and they said to me, the only thing people are going to remember is they're eating the cats and dogs. And I said, oh, no, they're going to remember the exchange where the former president says to the current president, I have no idea what you just said. Was Eric Shear in your ear, Jake?
Eric Sherling.
Yeah, surely. I mean,
Eric Sher. Yes, I think Eric Sherling was in my ear. It was. I believe so. But as you know,
Okay.
you can't talk to them, but they can talk to you. But no, nobody was saying. We were kind of all just watching it. As you know, the technology has advanced since we did debates together in 2015, 2016, and Dana and I had iPads that you could write on if we wanted to convey anything to the team. And
okay, wait a
so
minute. I'm just curious. Did anyone up in the booth? Because this happened when I did it with CNN. I wasn't working for CNN, for the benefit of the audience who didn't know. I was working for Salem, but we teamed up for 4 debates. Jeff or Eric would yell into the earphone, stop him, that's not true. Or go to this. Did anyone say, oh my God, Jake, he's out of it?
No one said anything. We were just, this was, I think, CNN's first presidential debate in a long, long time. And the only one that was not run by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which ran all of the debates until 2024, when both parties lost confidence in the Commission on Presidential Debates. So there was a lot of pressure on us just doing our job. I don't know what they were saying in the control room. Maybe they were saying things like that. I have no idea. But it was just me and Dana, and we didn't hear anything other than go to question 7, go to question 8. Let's keep going. Like we were just like trying to keep the trains running on time. As you know, Hugh, from doing these, the job is really not to be the star. The job is to ask the questions and have the candidates battle it out. Yeah, and Dana. So when he said, we finally beat Medicare, I wrote on the iPad to the control room. I wrote "Holy smokes," keeping it clean again. That is actually what I wrote though, because that's not just,
I was wondering.
Extra
it's not couple of letters than you needed.
No. I was thinking something harsher, but I'm not cleaning it up for Salem. That is actually what I wrote, because I didn't know who was in there. Like for all I knew, my mom was there. And Dana wrote a note, passed a note to me that said he just lost the election. It was as horrible as it was to watch on TV, and I have since watched it on my computer. It was worse in person because it was right there. And
I gotta think that. I've been in some terrible interviews before where people break down or they freeze up or they're embarrassed, and I feel bad for them. I have no idea what that car crash was like. You were in a car crash, and I don't know when you realized it, or did you realize that you were in a car crash?
Yeah. And that first answer was the first answer when he completely lost his train of thought. I thought, now look, we'd all been watching him aging, right? I mean, it wasn't, and he was, debating has not been his forte for a long, long time. But this was something else. This was, oh my God. they've been really hiding something. Yes, we saw that he was getting older and was prone to gaffes, and like there are moments now that seem obvious in retrospect that he was addled, but at the time, I don't know what I thought about those moments, but this was, oh my God, this something serious is wrong with this guy. And then it kept getting worse, and then he would lose his train of thought, not even know what he was saying, start reaching for comfort clauses and comfort phrases, like, the things that I did in
No
terms of
joke.
yeah, and
No
then
joke.
no joke then he would stop himself anyway. And then
That's it.
he would start the other thing that was really bizarre and alarming and indicative of losing an ability to really follow a train of thought was when he brought up the tragic murder of that Georgia nursing student, and why it was a question about abortion rights, an issue that any Democrat theoretically would want to discuss, and that he brings up Laken Riley, gets her name wrong, I think. Maybe he got it right. Maybe he did. No, he got it wrong in the State of the Union, but he didn't even mention her name. But he mentioned her murder, and it's just like, why are you talking about, like, why are you taking theoretically one of your strongest issues and immediately pivoting to one of your weakest issues?
I'm going to come back and ask for your theory of debate prep in a moment for him. But Alex, I skipped over one crucial entry in my chronology, which is the April 24th meeting at the White House of the Pod Bros and the president. I don't know if you reported on that or if Jake reported on that. April 26th, John Favreau, Pfeiffer, Favreau's wife were there. They left, quote, deeply disturbed. So they knew about it too.
Jake did more of this reporting than I did, but I will say that the Pod Bros are like a lot of people that had seen Joe Biden in 2021, 2022, and thought that a lot of the attacks on his age by members of the Republican Party or right-wing media were full of it. And so their instinctive reaction was whenever there was another instance was to dismiss it as just like another instance of bad faith attacks. But the truth was that Joe Biden, by all accounts from people we talked to, got precipitously worse in 2023 and 2024. And John Lovett, one of the Pod Bros, has been honest. When I think like just the other month he said, "Listen, I didn't say anything because I would prefer Joe Biden, even in that state, to Donald Trump." And that was the calculation of not just the Pod Bros, but members of the administration, the senior leaders of the Democratic Party, which is they preferred Joe Biden at 100 years old to Donald Trump at any age. But the problem was that if you look at any polling, that the voters did not agree with that.
Yeah.
Like that argument, Joe Biden at 100 years old is not a 270 electoral vote candidate.
Right.
And
he can't make critical decisions about whether to send B-2s to bomb nuclear facilities at Fordo. He comes up with random dates for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I'm going to come to the big question, but first I wanted to go back. Jake, you've done a lot of debate prep. I've done enough of it. We know the week that they spent with President Biden, Ron Klain arrived. He's disappointed. Anita Dunn's there. Everybody's there. Do you think they overworked him, underworked him? What's your consensus view a month after the book's out? You've had a chance to think about it. What did they do that week to him?
I think that it's pretty fair that they did not overwork him. He was sick, and they let him rest. They let him nap. They did some run-throughs. And look, at this point in first of all, yes, he comes to debate prep having done very little pre-preparation, which Ron Klain is very upset about. But the truth of the matter is that I think that there could have been five, like let's say there were three presidential debates. I think that he was, I think that he is at the point in his life now that the odds were better than 50-50 that what we saw the night of the debate was what we were going to see. There's always a chance that he would have had a better than average night, but I mean, it's impossible to make a computation like this, but I think that that's just Joe Biden. That, I mean, it was a bad night, but it's not like an aberrant night. It was, this is who he is. He is addled, and it was 9 o'clock p.m. to 10:30 p.m., a very late night. And he had had a rough month, but guess what? The presidency is full of rough months. The idea that this excuse about the travel is, oh, he was in Normandy and then he came to Delaware for his son's trial, and then he was in Italy for the G7, and then he went to Los Angeles for the Clooney fundraiser, and then he went to Camp David for prep, and then he went to Georgia for the debate. It's like, oh, it's so much travel. That's not so much travel for a president. That's a travel packed month, but like, that's what presidents do. I mean, all the time they do that.
So it is after the debate.
Yeah.
I just can't. I have no idea why they let him walk out that day. I would have actually canceled if I had seen anything like that. I would have taken the heat and said he's sick. We'll reschedule.
Yeah, he has COVID.
President Trump said anytime, anywhere.
Congresswoman Annie Custer said after the debate, she joked about, I think this is in the book, like, didn't you guys have a positive COVID test sitting around somewhere that you could have used? I mean, like,
what was
it's hard
the
to argue
riveting part of the book
worse.
Is getting him out. That is those 3 weeks, it just dislodging Team Biden from their sinecures and the machine that they had built that kept them all in clover is riveting. But I want to make sure I leave enough time for the most important question. And I've asked a couple of Democrats this, and Ro Khanna comes on the show. Rose Fearless. He'll talk to you about, Chris. They all have their answers. None of them are good. Was he competent to be president from July of 2024 on, and should the 25th Amendment have been invoked, Jake Tapper, knowing what you know about being president?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to rely upon what we heard from cabinet secretaries. We interviewed a number of them, and there were a couple of them that said that they did not think that he could be relied upon for the proverbial 2 a.m. phone call with a national security emergency. So definitionally, no, he was not, because the job is a 24/7 job, and the job requires somebody who is able to take that 2 a.m. phone call, period, full stop. And
Alex, do you agree with that? Is that your assessment as well? 6 months after finishing the book and a month after finishing the heavy part of the tour, Joe Biden should have been out of there.
I mean, I agree with Jake in that I'm also relying on the sources, people that saw Joe Biden up close, members of the cabinet, senior administration officials, and also, you had members of Congress that said, listen, if you're not up to running for re-election, then you shouldn't be president right now.
And that to me, go ahead, Jake.
Do you know Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez? She's a really interesting. She's a very interesting Democrat from Washington State. She's beat Joe Kent twice in a swing district. She's just you should have her on sometime. She's an interesting person. And she actually tried to introduce an amendment in the Appropriations Committee a couple weeks ago, saying that there should be a process for if members of Congress are addled, are cognitively declined, and staffers or other members of Congress are concerned about it. There should be some sort of way that the House Ethics Committee or somebody handles it. And of course, it got defeated in voice vote because nobody wanted that. But she is the only Democrat that came forward and said not only did she think Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee, she thought that he shouldn't be president anymore. And that, to me, was a gutsy thing for a Democrat to say. But it also was, and J.D. Vance was making the same argument at the same time, but Obviously, that was the perception of the taint of politics there. But that's really the only intellectually consistent argument, because the job of you can't be a candidate because you're too addled. Um, the presidency is actually a much more difficult job, maybe not as demanding in terms of travel, but the presidency itself is the toughest job in the world. So I thought that was a
And
very
every
intellectually
decision you
honest.
make can cost
Yeah.
the lives of thousands of people. He should not have
Yeah.
been president. No one will ever persuade me of that. Let me get to the one question and then to the bigger Uber question. One question. You mentioned that David Ignatius, who used to be my colleague at the Post and is the dean of Washington columnists now, Bill Maher, Dean Phillips, these were some commentators who spoke up. Was it a decision by Alex and Jake at the beginning of the process to exclude the center right and the right because they don't have credibility with the people you were aiming the book at? Or did you not trust them? Because there are a long list of people like Ben Shapiro and Guy Benson and Mary Catherine Ham and Hugh Hewitt and Ben Domenech, who all said, this man's infirm, and we said it for 3 years, but no one's quoted. Was that a decision editorially that you two made not to quote the center right to the right for reasons of your own?
No, I'd actually say the biggest reason why we may not quote them is that we pitched a 50,000 word book and then wrote 115,000 words, and then Penguin was like, you cannot go above 85,000 words. Um, I'd also say that there were lots of commentators. Saying lots of things, including David Ignatius and Ben Shapiro, and Megyn Kelly, and but there's a difference between reporting and commentating. And yes, you can look at Joe Biden tripping up the stairs and look at some of his comments, which were troubling in public. But our goal with the book was to show what was going on behind the scenes that was not public.
So the question becomes, reporters are the differentiator here between commentators. There are at least two reporters, mentioned John Carl and Michael Shear, who saw this, and if they told their news organization, it did not get to the top of their news organization or onto the air. And this brings me to the biggest question of all, Jake. The echo chamber that Ben Rhodes was so proud of building to get the JCPOA across the finish line, is it still there? Can it be reformed, or is it impermeable to bad news for Democrats?
I think that there are lots of different silos, and you and I have talked about media bias before, and I don't disagree with your perceptions of there being biases in the media. I think that there are lots of different ones. I think that Trump is an added factor. Like, you can talk about media bias against Mitt Romney in 2012 versus Barack Obama, and that, again, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think the Trumpness of it all adds an additional motivation. But I also think that there is a difference between what we can factually report and what we can comment on through observation. And we, like Alex said, we did focus on proof and not commentary. Yes, there is an allusion. There is, I think, a sentence that includes Ignatius and Maher, just to give them their due, as people in the chamber that you're talking about that were willing to take a risk and say what was obvious to you and to so many others. But I think beyond that is the omerta of all these Democrats who saw everything that you're talking about and were not sharing it with people beyond Ignatius, beyond Peter Baker, who had a couple pieces there, Michael Shear, who had a piece there, beyond Alex, who had pieces. Like, there really was an unbelievable conspiracy of silence. And
the punishment meted out on Annie Linsky and team at the Wall Street Journal. It was brutal, and it was intended to be. Am I right? I mean, they intended to send a message.
Siobhan Hughes and Annie Linsky wrote a piece at the beginning of June 2024 that was titled something like "Behind the Scenes, Biden Shows Signs of Slipping." It was a piece that was assigned after the Her report came out. And to their credit, Linsky and Hughes and their editor, wrote the best story they could at the time that told many of the same stories that we have in the book, except ours, our people were willing to talk a little bit more and be identified as a Democratic source. They weren't able to even get that because there was such fear in the Democratic Party. They wrote their story. It was true. They were attacked savagely by the Biden White House, the Biden campaign, by Democratic members of Congress who scarcely a month later would be behind the scenes clamoring for Biden to drop out. And let me just say, and we have feted Annie and Siobhan throughout this book tour, but let me just also say, like, that was, and I'm speaking for my observation of what they went through, is that this was traumatic for them. It was very traumatic for them because if you're a journalist, all you have is your reputation. All you have is the desire to get stories correct and break news and get the facts accurate. And they did. And they did. And yet they were treated by Democrats, by Democratic members of Congress, and even by some of their own colleagues as if they were pariahs. And that was horrific. What can be done to break this particular silo, because I think there are lots of different silos these days, is that people like Annie and Siobhan need to be rewarded and held up as gutsy. I think that Annie got a Gerald Ford Award a few weeks ago for her coverage of the Biden White House, so that's one small step in the process. But obviously, I think that there needs to be a reckoning in the news media, and even more so, there needs to be a reckoning in the Democratic Party.
Now, this brings me to the last question for you, Alex. Actually, two. When Jake is being watched by, how many people watched that debate? 60 million people? It was some ridiculous number. It was off the charts high. When he was being watched by all these millions of people, what were you doing, Alex? And who were you with? And what? Because you got a lot of accounts of other people that night and what they're saying. What were you doing?
I was in Atlanta in the media spin room watching the debate on all the TVs, basically right outside where everyone would go afterward. And, I, as someone that had been covering Biden's age pretty aggressively for a while, I remember I had, like a dinner with a few reporters, including David Weigel, right beforehand. And Weigel, I remember, said to me, he's like, I think people are discounting the possibility that Biden is a disaster. And I was like, yeah, I think that's possible. And everyone around the dinner was like, yeah, sort of shrugged. And then I remember someone that was at that dinner within 10 minutes was like, vindication for Alex. And it was like this surreal experience of, as someone that had been covering him, I was, but was told repeatedly, including by people that I trusted, that I was wrong, to see it and be like, oh my God. And and then right so after the debate, the spin room is surreal because the Trump people come in a stampede. They're everywhere. and then for 20 minutes no Biden people show up. None. There is like the first 20, and it's just this like weird. I've never been to a spin room where only one side is in the spin room. And it's like people are asking us if we want quotes, which is like this unique experience. And then eventually, the Democrats come in this sort of phalanx of, I think it's Mary Trump, Gavin Newsom, and Raphael Warnock. They take like 5 questions and they get the hell out of there. And it was this, and I honestly, I had a hit at 5 a.m. the next morning, and I didn't sleep the entire night because it was just like, it was after
like election night 2016.
Yeah.
When you've been a part of something, or you're watching something historic unfold, I'm not surprised. Gentlemen, that's 45 minutes of your time. That's a lot of time. I appreciate it. It's a very fine book, and I think it puts on the table for future campaigns. Everybody's got a responsibility. If you see something, say something. There are hundreds of people that could have saved the Democratic Party from that and might have gotten a different nominee. I just think the profound irresponsibility of everyone who was party to this is the contribution that Original Sin makes. Time for one bonus question. I've never heard of Anthony Bernal before. I don't run on Democratic circles except the guys who are my age. Alex, you first. How do you sum him up? Is he going to have a role ever again in any White House?
No, but I don't think he wants to. And I think that speaks to his power. His entire life has become about the Bidens. And it is very telling that on Inauguration Day, when Trump's Inauguration Day, earlier this year, he updated his LinkedIn to be chief of staff to the post-Biden office. And it has struck many people that when he has talked about it, he talks about their post-presidential office, meaning not just Biden's, but Jill and Joe Biden's. He is Jill's.
So I know who he is in my world. I worked for Nixon out of college. Jake, you remember Chuck Colson. Is Anthony Bernal his Chuck Colson?
Oh, wow. That's a, I haven't been asked to compare. I've been asked how this compares to Watergate. I've not been asked how to do a player by player like that. I don't know. Or Jeb Magruder or Bob Haldeman.
Well, Chuck, who was a friend of mine, famously said he'd run over his grandmother if it helped elect Richard Nixon president. So it sounds to me like Bernal is that kind of a fanatic.
Yeah, but I do think his allegiance was to Jill more than to Joe. And I would say, and this is not in defense of Anthony Bernal or Annie Tomasini or Mike Donilon or Steve Ricchetti, but I would say when people ask us who we think is the most responsible for what happened, it begins and ends with Joe Biden and then Jill and then Hunter, maybe even Hunter before Jill. But he's not a husk of a man. I mean, he was the president of the United States with cognitive abilities enough to know what was going on. He was the opposite of Dunning-Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger theory that stupid people don't know how stupid they are because they're unaware of the vast amount of knowledge that they don't have.
Chance Gardner, yeah.
Yeah, this is the opposite of that. Joe Biden is fully aware of what he is not capable of doing anymore and was hiding a lot of that from the public as much as possible. I think that at the end of the day, and again, I'm not absolving the people around them, but at the end of the day, Joe, Jill, and Hunter were the ones that drove this train off the cliff.
I agree with that. And on that note, I'm going to let you two go. Original Sin is still in bookstores. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's going to be a standard reference work for the campaign of 2024 and terrific reporting. Jake and Alex, thank you for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Always great to talk to you, Hugh. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugh.
Thank you, Jake.